AITA for leaving my girlfriend's stuff at her ex's after she said he treated her better? I met Sarah a little over 2 years ago at a small get-together I went to without much expectation. A mutual friend introduced us. And although the meeting was nothing out of the ordinary, the conversation between us flowed in a way I hadn't anticipated. From the start, she struck me as a reserved person, quiet, the kind who seems to carry a lot without making a fuss. She wasn't one for drama or seeking attention for what she had been through. That night, we stayed up talking for hours, moving from simple topics like music to our plans for the future. And in the middle of it all, I felt I was with someone genuine. She had clear goals, though it was also obvious that life had dealt her some tough hands. Shortly after, we started dating. The relationship began in a very normal, even healthy way. We each maintained our own space. We lived in separate apartments, saw each other on weekends, and when our schedules allowed, we'd cook dinner together or just talk for hours. It was easy to be with her. In one of those conversations, Sarah told me she had to drop out of college a couple of years back. The main reason was financial strain. She came from a family that didn't have a lot of money and had tried to juggle a full-time job and her classes, but in the end, she couldn't keep up with both. That had left her feeling incredibly frustrated, as if she were stuck at a certain point in her life. I remember she said she felt like her life was on pause. At that time, my situation was very different. I had a stable, well-paying job in corporate finance. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had worked hard to get to that point, and for the first time, I felt a degree of stability. I could cover my expenses, pay my rent, and still put a little into savings. I've never been one for reckless spending, but I didn't want to live in constant fear about money, either. The relationship progressed naturally, without any pressure. After almost a year together, we started to consider the idea of living under the same roof. It wasn't an impulsive decision. We talked about it several times, calmly. We went over the pros, the cons, the timing, and the responsibilities. Sarah was excited. She saw it as a chance for a fresh start. I saw it that way too. For me, sharing my life with someone I loved made sense at that point. When we finally moved in together, we agreed that I would handle most of the expenses. She was working odd jobs, nothing permanent, and I earned enough to manage it without feeling too strained. At the time, I didn't see it as a burden at all, but rather as an investment in our relationship. Besides, I knew one of her biggest goals was to go back to school, and I wanted to support her in that. A few months later, she did. I took care of the tuition, the books, and other school-related expenses, plus practically all the household costs. Rent, utilities, groceries, everything. I never did it because she directly asked me to. It was my decision. I felt that if I was in a better position, helping her was the right thing to do. She, for her part, was grateful. She told me that without my support, she never would have been able to re-enroll, and that somehow, someday, she would pay me back. During that period, living together was good. Not perfect, of course, but stable. We had arguments like any couple, almost always about everyday things, schedules, cleaning, being tired from a long week, nothing out of the ordinary. I worked long hours, and it wasn't uncommon for me to get home late and exhausted. Sarah handled some of the household chores, though not always consistently. I never kept a scorecard of who did more or less. I simply wasn't interested in measuring that. Over time, I started to notice something I initially brushed off. Sarah talked a lot about her ex-boyfriend. It wasn't constant, but she mentioned him more than what seemed normal to me. I figured it must have been a significant relationship since they had been together for several years. Since I'm not a jealous person, I didn't make a big deal of it at first. She said her ex was a complicated guy, but that she had also learned a lot from that relationship. Sometimes, without realizing it, she would make comparisons between situations in her past and our present. I try not to take it personally, though I have to admit it made me a bit uncomfortable at times. Still, I chose not to turn it into a problem. As the months went by, I began to feel the weight of being the sole financial provider. It wasn't so much that Sarah didn't do anything, but that the entire responsibility rested on my shoulders. If something went wrong, there was no safety net. If I got sick or an unexpected expense came up, everything depended on my paycheck. That pressure started to become a constant, even if I didn't always say it out loud. Despite that, I remained convinced it was worth it. Sarah was making progress in her studies. She seemed more motivated and self-assured. We talked about future plans, about her finishing her degree, us getting better jobs, maybe moving to a bigger place. I kept telling myself that this was all temporary, just a transitional phase, until something happened that I never saw coming. One day, I was called into a meeting at work. It wasn't entirely unusual, but from the moment I walked into the conference room, I felt a different atmosphere. Someone from Human Resources was there, and in a matter of minutes, they explained the situation. The company was going through a major restructuring, and my position had been eliminated. It was all very fast, almost mechanical. They gave me a basic severance package and told me my last day was effective immediately. I walked out of that building with a strange mix of disbelief and fear. Since I started my career, I had never been unemployed. My head filled with questions in a matter of seconds. How was I going to pay the rent? What about Sarah's tuition? How long would it take to find another job? That night, I went home with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if everything we had built was at risk. When I told Sarah what had happened, she reacted calmly. At first, she told me it wasn't the end of the world, that these things happen, and that the important thing was that we were together. For the first few days, she was understanding. She even tried to cheer me up. She kept saying she believed in me and that I would find something better soon. Regarding money, her approach was similar. She suggested we adjust our spending, buy cheaper groceries, avoid expensive restaurants, and choose more affordable places if we went out. I listened to all of this carefully, but something caught my attention right away. Not once did she mention the possibility of contributing from her own paycheck. Sarah worked part-time at a coffee shop near campus. I knew she didn't make much, but it wasn't zero, either. I didn't expect her to cover half the expenses or anything close to it, but I thought she would naturally offer to help with something. Even if it was just symbolic, paying for a portion of the groceries, a small utility bill, or simply saying, "I'll take care of this." That never happened. At first, I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself that maybe she didn't see it as necessary or was embarrassed to bring it up. However, that omission started to stick in my mind more than I wanted to admit. And so, I began cutting expenses on my own. After losing my job, the first thing I did was tighten my belt as much as possible. I canceled streaming subscriptions, stopped ordering takeout, and practically eliminated my personal outings. I would sit down and go over our budget again and again, carefully tracking every expense, trying to make sure the money would last until the end of the month. Meanwhile, Sarah continued with her routine as if nothing much had changed. She went to her classes in the mornings, worked in the afternoons, and went out with her friends on weekends. I didn't want to control her life, so I didn't say anything. Luckily, it didn't take long for me to find another job. I was hired relatively quickly, but the difference from my previous one was stark. The salary was lower, the benefits were minimal, and the hours were much more demanding. Still, I didn't hesitate to accept it. I wasn't in a position to be picky. We needed stability, even if it was on a smaller scale. When I told Sarah, she was happy, gave me a hug, and said she was proud of me. In that moment, I felt a slight sense of relief, as if things were starting to get back on track, albeit with fewer resources. But that relief was short-lived. A few weeks later, she started making comments that made me uncomfortable. Initially, they were subtle, almost like she said them without thinking. One night, while we were having dinner, she said something like, "Hey, don't you think that job pays too little? Maybe you could look for something better." I didn't take it the wrong way right then. I calmly explained that it was temporary, that I was just starting out, and my plan was to gain experience while keeping an eye out for better opportunities. She nodded, but her expression made it clear she wasn't entirely convinced. Days later, she brought the topic up again, this time with another suggestion. She told me she had been thinking and that maybe I could get a second job for a while so we could be more financially secure. That annoyed me a bit more. I had barely been at this new job for a month and was still adjusting to the pace, the environment, and the workload. Taking on a second job wasn't simple, neither physically nor mentally. I told her I didn't think it was feasible right now. She didn't push it, but her face showed a clear disappointment. As the days went by, those comments started to repeat more frequently and became more pointed. They were no longer isolated suggestions, but constant little comparisons to the life we had before. I remember one day she showed me a photo on her phone. "Look, babe, my friend's new iPhone is beautiful, isn't it?" I nodded without much interest. Then she added, I was going to ask for one for my birthday, but I know you can't afford it now. It's fine. A nice little gesture will be enough. She wasn't demanding anything directly, but the message was clear. I was left with an uneasy feeling, as if I was no longer meeting expectations. I didn't say anything. I just forced a smile and changed the subject. From then on, I began to notice a fairly obvious pattern. Everything came wrapped in a seemingly understanding tone, but she always dropped the same hint that I was no longer up to par. She never asked for anything outright, but she constantly insinuated it. For my part, I was feeling increasingly worn out. The new job demanded a lot from me, and the pressure of barely making it to the end of the month kept me in a state of constant tension. I was sleeping poorly, I was irritable, and I was still trying my best to stay calm when I was home. There was one day in particular that finally got to me. I made a mistake at work and broke some company equipment. It wasn't anything major, but I got a reprimand and was told the cost would be deducted from my paycheck. It wasn't a huge amount, but emotionally it hit me harder than I expected. I felt like everything was piling up. I left work with my head full of numbers, thinking about bills, responsibilities, and how tight everything already was. I knew that deduction meant less breathing room that month, less peace of mind. While driving home, I started asking myself questions I had previously avoided. I questioned if I was truly in a partnership where we both supported each other, or if I was just carrying the entire load. For the first time, the idea of breaking up with Sarah stopped being a distant thought. It wasn't an impulse, but a real possibility that began to form in my mind. I felt the relationship no longer brought me peace. On the contrary, it was draining my energy, my money, and my emotional stability. When I got to our apartment complex, I parked the car and turned off the engine, but I didn't get out right away. I stayed there, sitting with my hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead without focusing on anything. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I didn't go in because I knew what was probably waiting for me. Another comment, another comparison, another indirect way of reminding me that I wasn't the same man as before. That day, honestly, I just didn't have the strength for it. There, in the silence of the car, I started accepting something I had been avoiding for a while. It no longer felt like a team. I was living with someone, but I felt completely alone. Eventually, I gathered what strength I had, got out of the car, and went inside. Sarah was in the living room, sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone. When she saw me, she looked up and greeted me casually. "Hey," she said. "I actually wanted to talk to you." I hadn't even taken off my shoes when she continued. "This weekend my friend is having her bachelorette party. She wants us all to go. I'd like to go, but I need some spending money." I nodded almost by reflex. I had no energy to argue. "All right," I told her. "Take it from your savings." She frowned, as if she didn't expect that answer. "And you're not going to give me anything?" she asked. "My savings are for something else." At that moment, I felt something inside me tighten. I looked at her calmly, though I was seething inside. "For what else?" I asked. "That's your expense. In fact, you should start contributing something to the household with your savings. You do live here, after all." Her expression changed instantly. She went from surprise to angry in a matter of seconds. "You have reality completely twisted," she replied, her voice rising. "I'm your girlfriend. You should be covering everything. You're a man, aren't you?" That line hit me harder than I expected. I took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, I am a man," I said. "A man who is trying to survive. And I can't do it if there's someone draining all my money." Sarah stood up from the couch, clearly upset. "Wow, I didn't realize you were one of those," she said sarcastically. "Now you're probably going to say you want a 50-50 relationship." She paused and delivered the final blow. You know what? Dylan actually knew how to treat a woman. In that instant, something inside me just snapped. I didn't react immediately. I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just turned around. I walked to the bedroom, pulled a large cardboard box out of the closet, and carried it to the living room. Without looking at her, I started putting her things inside. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, anything of hers I could find. "What is wrong with you?" she asked, her voice shaking with agitation. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just kept at it, folding things and packing them without stopping. He knew how to treat a woman, right? I finally said calmly. "Then that's perfect. I'm going to take you to him." That's when she realized I wasn't joking. "Babe, calm down," she said, approaching me. "I didn't mean that. Really, I'm just stressed." I stopped for a moment and looked at her for the first time since I started. You're stressed? I replied. You don't do anything. You don't contribute anything. You just consume my money. You're like a parasite, so you better leave. I taped the box shut, picked it up, and walked out of the apartment without waiting for her reply. I took the things down to my car and went back up for more. While I did that, Sarah followed me everywhere, crying, trying to explain herself, begging me to calm down. I ignored her completely. When I finished loading everything, I opened the passenger door. Get in, I told her, or I'm throwing all of this in a dumpster. She hesitated for a few seconds, but ultimately got in, still crying. I started the car and drove off without a word. During the entire trip, I kept my eyes on the road. She never stopped talking, saying she was sorry, that she hadn't thought it through, that she was tired, that she didn't want it to end like this. I didn't respond. I already knew exactly where I was going. I knew where her ex-boyfriend lived because a friend of mine, Mike, lived in the same apartment building. While driving, I pulled out my phone and called him. Hey, Mike, I said, do you know which apartment Dylan, Sarah's ex, lives in? He was silent for a second. Yeah, he's in 512, he replied. Why? I hung up without explaining. I arrived at the building, parked, and got out of the car with one of the boxes in my hands. I walked to the entrance while Sarah stayed in the car, sobbing. I buzzed the apartment. Yeah, a voice answered through the intercom. Hey, I said. Dylan, I have a package for you. Oh, sure, I'm coming down. I waited. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's cries, but I didn't move or say a word. A few minutes later, Dylan came down. I recognized him, though I'd only seen him once before. He looked confused, and even more so when he saw the boxes and Sarah in my car. When he got closer, Sarah quickly got out of the car and went straight toward him. Without saying a word, she fell to her knees in front of him. I stood a few steps away, watching the scene unfold without intervening. Please, she said through her tears. Help me, don't leave me here. Dylan looked at her, bewildered, then looked at me, and then back at her. His expression changed in seconds from surprise to discomfort. Before anyone else spoke, he blurted out. Look, if he already knows. I didn't want it to be like this. I thought he wasn't going to find out. That's what you told me. It was just a fling. Fun. I don't want anything serious. That was enough. He didn't need to explain any further. In his attempt to defend himself, he had made everything clear. He didn't speak like someone who was confused, but like someone who knew exactly what had been going on. Sarah snapped her head up as if she couldn't process what she was hearing. What are you talking about? She said to him. Don't say that. Dylan took a step back. No, this isn't what I want right now, he replied. I'm not going to get into trouble again. He looked at the boxes, then at her, and shook his head. Count me out. It's over. I didn't ask you to come here. Without another word, he turned around and went back into the building. The door clicked shut behind him, and everything fell silent. Sarah stayed there on the sidewalk, on her knees, completely still. I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. All I felt was a bitter confirmation. Many of the doubts I'd had were not just in my head. I walked over, left the boxes by the entrance, and returned to my car. I opened the door. There's your stuff, I told her. Don't ever look for me again. She didn't answer. She just kept crying. I got in the car and drove away. The ride back was different. I didn't have that pressure in my chest that had been with me for weeks. I didn't feel happy, either. It was a strange feeling, a mix of sadness with a feeling of lightness, like when you finally let go of something that was weighing you down, even if it hurt to have carried it for so long. When I arrived at the apartment, the silence was noticeable, but it wasn't the emptiness of her absence. It was a calm I hadn't felt in a very long time. I sat on the couch and just let all the exhaustion wash over me. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The following days weren't easy, but at least they were clear. There were no calls or messages. I didn't try to find her, either. I focused on my work, on getting my finances in order, and on rediscovering routines I had set aside. Over time, I began to notice something curious. Even though I was earning less than before, the money was actually enough for me now. Without the constant extra expenses, without the indirect pressure, and without having to meet someone else's expectations, my paycheck went further. I could pay the rent, utilities, and groceries, and even treat myself to something small now and then. Nothing extravagant, but enough to feel like I was in control again. And beyond the money, I got back something more important, my peace of mind. I stopped feeling that tension when I came home. I no longer anticipated comments, comparisons, or disguised criticisms. I felt like my effort made sense again. Several months have passed since then. I wouldn't say my life is perfect, but it is stable. And I now know that stability is worth so much more than I ever imagined. I learned something important from all of this. Not all relationships end because of a lack of love. Some break because there is no respect, no balance, and no understanding. I also learned that helping someone doesn't mean you have to neglect yourself, and above all, that a relationship should never feel like a constant burden. That was what I lived through, and that was the lesson it left me with. Comment. After a story like this, I think it is important to talk about our own peace of mind. Your kindness is a gift, not something others are entitled to take advantage of. Learning to set boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-respect. We often think we are being patient, but sometimes we are just allowing our own well-being to be drained. Ultimately, you are the primary caretaker of your emotional and financial health. Making the decision to walk away from a situation that no longer serves you can be the hardest part, but that is often where true healing begins. Remember that your inner peace is one of your most valuable assets. Protect it with the same energy you give to the people you care about. I hope you all find the strength to choose what is right for you, even when it is difficult. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.